Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to have you here at the IAM Institute of Asset Management for the Munster Branch. So this is our fourth event, I suppose our second of 2021, and today we have Dan O'Gorman. He's the Asset Management Lead with IFS. So look, it's great to have you all here again. You know, these have been well received to date. Well, I'd just like to kind of remind attendees that this event is being recorded and the recording starts now. I'd also like to bring your attention actually to slido.com. So this is the app that we'll be using during the course of these events going forward, and that I'll just show my screen there. So the slider.com app helps us with the polling and also with Q&A along the way also. So the number for that is 852-683. So the branch and Munster committee here is represented by Diarmuid, myself and Orla are co-chairs on this. Owen, Ryan, Ken and Clean also form part of this committee. So what we're going to go through here today is I'll do a quick brief introduction here for Dan O'Gorman. Dan then will take us through his own presentation on circular economy initiatives. There'll be a Q&A session afterwards with Dan. So if you want to ask any questions, please use the Slido app, or you can actually use the web-based version as well if you don't have it on your phone. And there'll be some closing comments then and more information. There's closing comments then and the next event, so Orla will close that out then. So look, just a reminder, so 852-683 is the number for that. I'd like to give you just a quick update also on what's happening in the IAM Ireland chapter. So the Leinster and Ulster branches are looking to launch in Q3 of this year. So if anybody's interested in joining those, please contact Keith Bingham and Sharon Callan, from each of those areas. So Keith is looking after Ulster and Sharon looking after Leinster. So we've already had some good chats with them in terms of what we're developing here in Munster. And the idea then is that we will kind of stagger the events between us. We'll have a coordinated approach, and that in time we look at a more strategic kind of planning mechanism for these events going forward. The IAM chapter itself then, so there's a committee working hard in the background. You may have not heard much at the moment. They are very active, in fact, in terms of defining how the chapter is going to perform and what its duties are and its roles and responsibilities going forward. So part of that then is including is developing the branch, developing the business plan around that, the next generation, funding models for future events, the centre support and governance and knowledge development, which is probably one of the most more applicable parts in this. What we've certainly found is that while there's a very strong interest in asset management, the level of kind of maturity still kind of remains quite low in many spaces. And what we want to do here is kind of support many of the organisations that form part of this membership in kind of getting their career goals and as an organisation achieving their own business goals also. IAM Global then on a kind of larger level, so there's a foundation award training and that can be found on the IAM website itself. And there's also some other hot topics launched around climate emergency, digital maturity and resilience. Just one other thing I noted actually earlier this morning on LinkedIn was that in Australia, they've actually mandated asset management for all infrastructure projects going forward. So I'd like to think that in time to come that this chapter will be part of a kind of a larger group that would look to encourage, I suppose, how we would lobby the government for similar type of kind of scenarios there also, where asset management will be applied to all kind of government projects going forward. But look, that's all part of the future plan. Sorry, next slide there. Sorry. So I'm going to hand this over to Dan O'Gorman. So I said Dan is with Integrated Facilities Solutions. I've had a number of discussions with Dan over the last 6 months on this topic, and there's quite a lot of detail in it, and it's really insightful. Actually, there's a lot of really useful nuggets within it. So, Dan, I'm happy to hand over to you. So, welcome aboard. In the meantime, if people could look at the Slido app, either on the website or on their phone, and just do a quick uh, polling on that, and send it on. That'll help Dan inform his presentation, and he can kind of adjust it accordingly. Then, okay, Dan, over to you.
Okay, good morning, folks, and thanks for that introduction, Connor. So delighted to participate in this interesting forum. Asset management is all part of what we do. Everybody has assets, some more valuable than others, and let's see how we can get value out of them. So the topics I'm going to cover today is presentation of value of GS1. So GS1 is a global organization, as I've told the guys already, Ken and the guys, is that GS1 has more offices than the UN. In fact, the only country in the world where there isn't a GS1 presence is in North Korea. And what GS1 is, every time you go to the shop and you pick something off the shelf and go to the cash register, well, that number, that unique identifier on the barcode, is issued by GS1. So that number is global, it is unique, and it has to be, otherwise you get confusion, you end up buying a dozen of eggs when you want to get a six-pack of Guinness. So our manufacturers authored. So what we really want to focus on today is how you can actually achieve all this for a cost-neutral basis. So we've all gone to Curry's and shops to go and buy a new fridge, and you look at the prices and you see there's a huge delta between an A++ and an A+ fridge or cooker or whatever. What I'm trying to do through this presentation is demonstrate to you how you can still achieve these targets, but in a cost-neutral manner by simply using the technology that's available today. The purpose, as you see there, is to best practice in the realm of generating awareness of the benefits of asset management. So, as I said at the start, asset management applies to every part of walks of life. And in the case of this forum, we can deal with business type assets, and my focus is on the built environment as well during this course of this presentation. So moving on to the next slide. So we have a timeline to actually meet, and given the latest general election in Ireland, the Green Party has a place at the table, and they are driving an agenda. And just like Ireland was first with plastic bags, first with no smoking, I assume that we'll probably be first in actually meeting the aggressive green targets, as you can see in the top right hand corner. It's following a plan. So as you can see here, the Green Deal is pan-European. It's not just the EU, but it's about getting everybody thinking in the same line. And then recycling, we've been familiar with for years, but that's now taking up a notch, which I'll show you during the presentation. The 39 and 11% is actually significant because, referring to the built environment, 39% of the total output of CO2 in the environment every year is produced in the built environment area. Of that 39%, 11% is actually built into the manufacturing of those products. So it's quite significant. So I mentioned earlier about trying to achieve a cost-neutral approach. And as we all know in business, you have customers number one. So as you can see here in the first call out, I'll try and illustrate how players can actually get benefits out of better communication through asset management. The second one is taking feedbacks. Again, communication is important. Everybody on this call knows that it's much more economic to actually keep the customers you have than go out searching for new customers. So the key here is keep your customers happy. As we've seen with Volvo and with other key players, they've now moved away from just fire and forget as you do in the F-16 fighter. They want to keep that relationship going by engaging with the customer on an ongoing basis. Tesla is a very good example of this, where you pay a fee to Tesla on an annual basis for different features that are in your car. Revenue generation is also important in cross-selling, because once you have that customer, you want to keep that customer loyal to your product. Increase retention and decrease churn. As I said earlier, it's extremely important that if a particular end customer, whether that's working for you as being the client for a supplier, or you selling a product, whether that's a service or a product, you want to stay in touch with your customer. The one thing that your C-level managers don't want is waking up in the morning and hearing something on the radio through social media that's something bad about their company. Because as we all know on this call, it's hard to build a reputation, but all it takes one email or one bad move to actually destroy that reputation overnight, particularly with social media the way it is today. Communication features and updates. So again, like everything R&D, if you're in the services industry, I know some of you are in the rail industry, some of you are in the gas networks, Gas Ireland, some of you in the pharmaceutical industry. But you have to stay in contact with your customer. I worked in Dell for 16 years, and there was a saying there was, if you're not innovating, you're not ahead. So there's no such thing as standing still in any industry these days because it's moving so fast. So I talked earlier about CRM and SEM. So everybody on this call is familiar with CRM, about building your customer relationship management. But the new kid on the block is SEM. And you can see here in this Venn diagram where they actually meet, making customers return recurring purchases. And that's what it's all about. So how can you actually achieve going a profitable outcome from investing in being green? Taking back what I said about going to Curry's or Harvey Norman's, buying your fridge, why are you paying an extra 100 quid for an A++ fridge when really you could make a living? And then when you go ask the salesperson, he'll say, well, I'm paying out 100 quid. What's my return? He'll say, well, you'll save about 10 quid on electricity per annum. So therefore you have a 10-year payback on that 100 quid you're paying. My argument is that if you can get more value out of your effort, well, then it becomes cost neutral. So on the left-hand side, some of you are familiar with this and some of you are not. It's an air handling unit, typically in most office blocks, most facilities. Up to last March 2020, if this thing broke down, people had the inconvenience of less air changes than they're used to or a higher temperature. Now with COVID and the fear of transmission of airborne viruses or bacteria, this has now become a high priority for everybody. As you can see here, this is the typical tag of an air handling unit. You can see carrier. It tells you the type, the order number, the location, the air volume, and the production date. Quite useful information, you might think. But if I look at a typical pint of milk, and apologies for anybody who's not from Dunnes Stores on the call, but you take the side of a pint of milk, costs €1. But as you can see here, you've got your warnings, you've got your EPDs, you've got your SOPs. EPDs is your environmental product declaration. So how do we take a typical product that costs €1 and actually apply the same level of information to a carrier air handling unit, or for that matter, a wagon on a train, a pipeline, a pump, whatever, a pharmaceutical piece of equipment, or indeed a box of aspirin? Because some of you from the pharmaceutical industry will be familiar with MFD capabilities that's in medicine these days. So again, how do we actually change this? We're all familiar with iPads, but how do you actually connect the dots and ensure productivity on this area? So I'm going to focus on this call on GS1. As I said earlier, they have more offices in the world than the UN, and they actually administer this number that you see in the bottom of the barcode. And all the barcode does is takes this number, looks up an index, and finds records that matches that unique identifier, as you can see in the bottom of the carton of milk. In the case of the carrier, that would be a unique ID. It wouldn't be this number. It would be a number equal to the serial number that you can see here on this particular area here. When that's transmitted into this, and then you get a full asset history with respect to this carrier. I'm going to deal with this, the famous virus, COVID-19. No, none of us knew about it last January 2020. It's only 13, 14 months ago. And I'm also going to deal with identify, capture, and share. This is what you do in your day-to-day business about your assets. How do you identify an asset? How do you capture information? And how do you share that information in an effective way? But what I'm going to focus in, how do you actually share this in a bi-directional way, not just in one way, as we've seen. So various things have happened in the industry since last March. I was lucky enough to be in New Zealand when this thing broke out, so I was actually traveling back through Dubai airport last March 2020 when all this was happening. And I became familiar with this type of thing. So who would have thought last March or before that you go to a restaurant and instead of picking up a paper menu, you're now picking up a phone and reading a QR code? Who would have thought when you go to a Hilton hotel that the cleaner actually puts this in the door of the jam so that you know that you're the first person in since the cleaner was there. Therefore, you've got some level of comfort in knowing that you were the first person in after the cleaner has done a clinical clean. This here is done by Hilton, but it's not done by Hilton. It's not even done by the facilities company who works for Hilton. It was done by the cleaning company, a German company that supplies the actual cleaning products. And they've stepped into the breach and actually provided this to all their customers worldwide. Again, if you hire a Hertz car, you have the exact same capability in that you'll see a seal on the door. This barcode actually gives ownership back to the person who cleaned the room. So if there's an issue, you just simply read this or QR code, and it actually tells you who was the cleaner that cleaned your room. This in itself actually empowers the cleaner to actually believe that they are part of saving a person's life or avoiding a person getting COVID-19. It's all about ownership, and it's all about using that technology to make it happen. This here is a coffee bean. Again, it's a QR code, but this actually traces back to where that coffee bean was actually picked or grown, and you can check that it was from a sustainable source. This here I'll go into in more detail as we go further. And then last but not least, if you're in the building scene, as Connor is, you have to make sure that your customers are happy. And how do you actually collect that information? Do you want to again see it on social media that they have a bad experience with their building? No, you don't. You want to see it through a process that actually uses assets. And then when issues are identified, you can trace back to the root, which I'll cover again during the course of the presentation. Again, innovation has changed. If anybody is concerned about the slowness of the way things are happening, this is a very interesting slide from McKinsey, who are a world-renowned consultant. As you can see on the top here, increase in remote working, they said, and this is a survey that was done by, I think, 600 different customers across the world. They said before COVID that it would take 454 days to actually roll out in remote working. They actually had to achieve it on average in 10.5 days when the disaster struck. If you look here at change of customer needs, they said it would take 511 days. It changed in 21.3 days. There's a lot of people on this call who actually have now become dependent on the delivery of the courier on an ongoing basis, instead of going to the shop. And this has changed fundamentally the way we actually deal. And it took a crisis to actually do this. So you can see here 10.5 days. As I said, this is the cleaning company that came up with these ideas. And if you go and look at IKEA, they actually give you, everybody talks about AI and digital twins. Just pick up this IKEA ad and you can actually get the full assembly instructions on how to put together a simple table in a virtual reality world. And it's quite simple, it's quite innovative. Imagine giving this to an assembler of a complicated piece of machinery or a guy doing maintenance. But we don't have to have these fancy space age glasses. This is just simply IKEA taking a simple process and putting it onto an app and making it user friendly and usable. And again, it's cost neutral. So I talked earlier about GS1. I think it's important to actually copy what other industries have done. I know Ken has worked in various retail industries in his career. He's quite familiar about the changes that have happened in different industries, and different industries work at different paces. So if you look at here at the top here, you've got the tractor, the farmer collecting the carrots, goes to the processing plant, and then this famous barcode is applied. A different barcode is applied for carrots, to cucumbers, and then it goes to the shop, and then it goes on the shelf. Then you go to, if you're in Lidl, and you have the app, then it actually counts who bought that packet of carrots in the loyalty program if you have Lidl Plus on your solution. Similar with Dunnes Stores, and I assume SuperValue will be doing this as well fairly soon. So it's a valuable piece of information, but this is the centerpiece. 30 years ago, 1990, the late Fergal Quinn, or Senator Fergal Quinn, actually sat in a store in his shop in Dublin here and started applying labels onto Flavin's porridge. Why? Because he was the first to introduce barcoding at the cash register, and he had to compensate that. Today, there are contractors on some of your construction sites who are sticking multiple barcodes multiple times onto assets, simply because that same process has not been adapted in the construction industry from the get-go. That's a situation you can easily change, as I'll show you at the end of the deck. So there are different types of codes. As you can see here, G10s, GLNs is about location. GSRNs is a location, is a staff or patient number. It gives you a unique number. So we all know in this country your PRSI number gives you unique. GSRN is actually a global unique number. So if this was applied in a global perspective, everybody in the world would have an independent number using the GSRN standard, which in itself is useful for online selling. GIAs is assets which are involved in, and this incorporates the serial number, the traditional serial number. So this is unique and it can be tracked from its life. And what I talk about life here, I talk about its primary life cycle, secondary life cycle, and tertiary life cycle, which again I'll touch at the end of the thing. And this is your famous shipping label, which consolidates all these, which are SSCC. So every container coming from China to Ireland has an SSCC, and that tracks and is used by the logistics companies to actually do this. And then your GLN is your location number, which again gives you unique. So how do we adapt this into the construction area and make it effective? So you can see here the designer and the specifier is on the left-hand side, and the supplier of raw materials. And this is an important component, especially if I talk about social media. There is an instance a couple of years ago where a ship went down on the Bay of Biscay. Well, it's listed in the Bay of Biscay, sorry, and they had to tow it to a port on the west coast of France. And when they actually went to investigate why the ship had listed, they found that it was carrying timber that had been sourced out of Ghana in the middle of Africa, and it was going to a company in the UK that was claiming that it was taking its timber from a sustainable source in Scandinavia. Needless to say, the scandal finished that company practically overnight because they were innocent of the fact they were working through a reseller who was buying in the timber but changing the codes. So again, we all need to be conscious of where your raw materials are coming from. Your G10 is tracking the manufacturer, offsite fabrication. If you take Intel outside in Leakside, they have moved 4 million man hours that were originally for construction on-site to off-site simply because of social distancing with COVID. So the industry is changing. Construction site we're all familiar with, fully compliant building. And this is what you all need to be cognizant of, the 70% of materials in the next building. So there's a very, very good everyday example of this. If you now go and you see a roadworks, you'll see the night before the planer comes along, a very noisy machine that planes off the surface of the tar macadam on your road. Then the following morning, they're laying down tar macadam. Believe it or not, it's the same material that took the day before. It's just gone to a batching plant that night, added more tar, but it's the same stone, same tar that's being reused. Big change from 10 years ago when they just laid a layer upon layer upon layer of tar macadam on the same road, and then eventually they had to increase the height of the pats, because guess what? The road surface was catching up with the level of the pats. So again, a very good example of how the way the industry is changing and adapting. So introduction. My boss wouldn't forgive me if I didn't actually talk about what we do in IFS. So as you can see here on the left, we actually take all this information that's generated during the design construction and actually turn it into a usable commodity or asset for the actual operational folks. And some of you will know that 10% to 20% of the total cost of ownership of a typical building is built in the actual construction of it. The other 80 to 90% is spent in the operation of it. But, and here's the big but, that 10% spend actually has a huge influence on the other 90% that has to be spent, and the decisions made in the construction and design and procurement stage actually impacts the efficiency of the building going forward. And as I said at the outset, now with laws in place, the whole thing has changed. And our clients that we work with, which is quite impressive, we've worked with all these companies, from Irish Prison to the zoo, two parallel instances but different uses. We're working with the NHS, and we're obviously working with CHIFM, which is the National Children's Hospital in Dublin, okay, and OPW. We're also working with major clients in the ICT sector because of NDAs, we're not allowed to tell who they are, but they are very large and global. Timing is crucial. Okay, so we're all familiar with this. Is inception, briefing, design stage, pre-handover, initial aftercare, and extended aftercare. So it's like buying a car, but in this case, it's a building. So you can see here, we have to define and ensure all stakeholders understand the project success criteria and KPIs. You're all in the asset management space. And what you specify is what you hope to get at the end of the process. So you can see here, to get from here to here, we've got a bridge to gap. We've got this. We've got to identify, we've got to capture, we've got to share, and we've got to use the information. It's pointless collecting 2 terabytes of information, and believe it or not, that's what typically collected on a major project, 2 terabytes of data. And then when the project is finished, the champagne bottles have been swung, the guys have gone out for a couple of pints after the top-out ceremony, contractors walked away, you're left with this huge array of information. So what do you do with it? Well, you should have started with the end in mind. Is the end that top-out ceremony, or the handover of the building. No, it's the end because of now the changes in society and the changes in the environment and our need to actually take care of the environment. It actually ends when those products are actually reused multiple times, which satisfies the the green economy, which we all have to sign up for, or the green. So just to put this in perspective, pre-COVID, back in 2015, in the span of 5 years, this is the World Economic Forum that runs the event in Davos every year. So this is not numbers picked out of the sky. This is based on proper research because this is a worldwide respected forum. So you see back in 2015, extreme weather was the only concern. By 2020, pre-COVID, you can see how this whole changed. So with this change, so does asset management has to change. This is fundamental to what we have to do as a generation. And companies are changing. You can see here Kerry, Glanbia, Diageo, HBS, which is the health business service side, and then Musgraves down in Cork. So originally I'm from Clare, so I'm fairly proud Munster man, okay, even though I'm living in Dublin at the moment. So that's picked. So circularity. So I'm just going to touch on circularity here. So why is there a focus? So again, I talk about the 39% and 11% rule. So 39% of the carbon that's produced by 2019 was down to the built environment. Of that 39%, 11% is actually due to the decisions that asset people like yourselves make and how you influence, and your manager and your construction people and your program delivery people can actually influence. They have 11% just from a sourcing perspective. This is from an operational perspective. This is from a sourcing perspective, and I'll delve into this. What's interesting about this slide is you take steel, plastics, aluminium, cement. This is what this color is. So at 2019, we produced as a worldwide 208 million tons of CO2. If we do nothing, by 2050, that would be up to 231 million tons per year. And at the same time, low-lying land, particularly around Clare and anywhere else in the Midlands, will be flooded because obviously because of ice melting and the ice caps melting, seas will rise and will end up with spending a huge amount of money on infrastructure and dams and so forth protecting the environment. So what are people doing? And this is what the Green Deal is about. It's cement recycling, waste reduction, reuse of building components, material efficiency and sharing. But where you come in as asset managers is in this one, prolonging the lifetime, because 8% of 19 million tons a year is actually down just by prolonging the life of assets. Now, this doesn't mean that you simply don't service a piece of equipment or you keep your car for 2 years longer than you expected, or keep that air handling unit chugging away and it's costing you a fortune. This is about, again, starting with the end in mind and making sure that what you buy is worth spending the extra money on. Going back to, again, to your fridge with a AAA, why am I paying an extra 100 quid for that particular product? Because it gives me a better return on my investment. So getting back to the National Children's Hospital, this has been in the news, and you can see here it's a wonderful building when it's going to be finished. It's where children will go unfortunately, if they have a health issue, and it's onus on everybody in this country to actually support this, albeit it's gone a bit over cost. But I think from an operation perspective, we have to make sure that, right, we spent the money, but let's make sure that it operates properly, make sure that the kids that unfortunately have to visit here on occasion, they actually have the best care in the world. And that's not just clinical staff, that is facilities, the people who provided the air handling units, the Arabs who have designed it, the contractors who are building it, BAM and so forth. All these people have to contribute towards the success of this building. And again, as I said earlier, the cost, even though it's enormous, is only 10 to 20% of the total cost of operating this facility over the next 30 years. So the decisions made now actually influence what happens. So what are we talking about here? In the whole area, and again, in this case, instead of the end customer, I'm talking about patients. But you can see here on the outside, some of you are involved in this area. It's all about all these people working together just to ensure that this person in the middle is got better outcomes. We're preventing, we're empowering, and we're communicating with the integration. So we're working together. So just to give you a typical example, this is a typical room that we've taken. And then how do we actually use the asset management? And how do we actually use that effort we put into tagging the assets in the initial stage into good use? As you can see as we go around this circle, There's a problem. Discomfort caused by a broken window. How can we use this technology that I've just talked about, similar to what you see in Lidl or Super Value or Dunn stores every day, which is a barcode? How do we actually transform that into actually being able to organize better how an issue that's been identified, i.e. a draft, and how do we actually use the asset information management to actually help the facilities guys who simply want to come to work every day and do a job in an effective and efficient manner, and then use this technology similar to what when a plane takes off from Dublin and arrives in Heathrow. How do we plan in advance to make sure that every player is actually aware that this carpenter's actually finished his job, the cleaner has moved in, and then the porter is bringing the patient back to bed? Because at the end of the day, this is the end customer. This is what's important. And then when you consider all this, again, I come back to my fridge. This actually makes the whole exercise an investment in technology, the investment in asset management worthwhile, because this child had a draft and was able to get back into bed way faster than the old way of doing things. So I'll just move on quickly because I'm conscious of time. So going back then to the design stage. So this is a typical design situation. You can see the specifier, and he has do not exceed targets, and I'll explain this in a second. We got the on-site personnel who are important players because these are the people who have to build the building. These are the people who have to operate the building. And then we got the designer. This is the person with the dicky bow who looks visually at the building. Is it going to be pleasing? But he now, or she, is now constrained by this. And it's simple like this. So back in 2019, as you can see here, current benchmarks, they the expectation was 225 kilowatts per meter square per year. That's the amount of energy. By 2030, they expect that down to be 55 kilowatts per meter per year. If you look at embodied carbon, which I'm talking about, they expect 1,100 kilograms CO2 emission, and they expect that to be halved down to 500 kilograms per meter square. And by 2050, they expect it to be neutral. So therefore, in the good old days, if you got the building and the hot water came out of the hot taps and the cold water came out of the cold taps and the windows opened and the doors closed, happy out. Now we have this situation where these targets have to be met. And how are these measured? BREEAM. So you've seen BREEAM or LEED certification on buildings. Where Connor lives, that building that's down in Cork is a highly certified building, and targets had to be met. But the designers and the specifiers had to actually keep in mind, do not exceed targets. And the questions answer, I'll come to this when we come back to it. Again, how do we EPDS bring a competitive advantage to business? So 76% of construction product clients want suppliers to be transparent about environmental impact, to be transparent about environmental impacts of their products. So green can actually help you sell more because clients and the young generation that's coming up are born thinking about the green. As I attended a conference recently, and an expert in this area said that his 12-year-old child knew more about the green ecology than he did, simply because they've grown up with it, and they want to make a difference. 72% of construction product clients want manufacturers to provide them with sustainable or green products. We've all heard about environmentally satisfied, and it's day and day. And then legislation is changing. Denmark, Finland, Sweden, France, and the UK are changing and bringing in what I'm going to show you now, which is EPD demand. Okay, so how do you actually transfer all this? So some of you on this call are probably scratching your head and saying, this has been tried before, it hasn't worked. Why should it work now? Simply put, the Norwegians have cracked this. They have a solution in Norway called NOBB, NOB. And what does that mean? Every building, whether it's public or private in Norway today, every product that's applied to that building by a manufacturer, they have to prepare a document like what you're seeing here on screen. So literally, you have things like solar factor, thermal transmittance, nominal height, integrated ventilation system, non-hazardous waste disposal mass, ozone depletion potential, photochemical, radioactive waste disposal, 0.00422, every product. This is what's changing. This is what the new green product or the green product passport is going to actually demand. So you're all familiar with products that you buy has a CE marking. If it doesn't have a CE marking, you can't use it in Europe. That has been successful. This is the next step. So if they've done it with CE marking, they're actually going to do it with this as well, and this is coming in. And as I said at the start of this conversation, Ireland being Ireland, will probably be one of the forefront of actually introducing this, and this is going to affect everybody. So therefore, the cost is actually being so it's going to change. So you take all this information, you take these EPDs, which are environmental product declarations, EPDs, you put them into assembly, the LCAs, assembly life cycle assessment, and then you end up with a building LCA. So there was a saying when I was growing up, if you look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. This is what they're talking about. You start with a Pareto, some of you are familiar with 20%, 20% rule. So if you look after 20% of the products, they're probably 80% of your core carbon producing. And then you manage those, and then you bring down your overall building. And this again is 11% of the 36% I talked about earlier. So just to reinforce that, it doesn't start with here. It doesn't start here. It starts back here with the materials. And you can see here, these are aluclad windows, and this is Norden, a Norwegian company. They're actually supplying to Cherrywood, the Cis job or the Heinz job in Cherrywood. They are the Munster Joinery of Europe, basically. They have a high standard of window, and they focused on aluclad because you get the best structure from the timber. The aluminium gives you robustness and weatherproofing, and then obviously glass is glass. And what we're actually looking at here is then how can all these people actually be part of this? GSRN, as I explained earlier, identifies this person for the life of that window. This is the guy who made this window or assembled this window in this Norwegian factory, and it can be traced right back to that person all the way through its life cycle. This is what changes in the construction site. Again using barcode technology, which is being introduced. You can see this guy can actually see the detail and check. This person here, who's the engineer I showed you at the start, can actually validate that what was in the design, i.e. black windows, are not white windows. And again, some of you are familiar with clash detection in BEM. Again, this can be done from a specification perspective as well. So again, this pays for the investment in putting those asset tags on at manufacturing process. This pays for the investment in actually having this tracking life to life. But the real win is in things like this, where you can actually go and then track if something goes wrong, replace the window handle, do other inspection, and make this guy, the maintenance guy, actually more efficient. Because now there's a reference point that he can actually track, and he can actually access this and find out the history of who did what to this window. Similar to when you bring your car to the maintenance shop these days, and when you sell that car, the first person, or if you're selling it privately, the person is going to ask you, well, can I have the service logbook? Why? Because if they look at the service logbook and find that that car has been serviced properly, well, then they'll know that that car will last a bit longer than the guy who bought the car and never got it serviced. It's common sense. So why shouldn't it be the same in construction? So as you can see here, so this is your building. Hopefully the National Children's Hospital lasts longer than 30 years, but let's suppose in somebody decides to take it down. And don't laugh, because I walk around Dublin, I'm not that old. I see that the central bank in Dame Street has been totally changed. If I go up to Marion Square and look across where the ESB offices are, they were demolished. As you know, President Robinson was involved in the protest when the original Georgian houses were knocked in our lifetime, and that has now been replaced by a totally new building. So buildings don't last as long as they did. But if they don't last, how can you actually repurpose those windows? How can the guy look at the life cycle or the life's car log, and how can he actually get confidence that that windows or those sets of windows have been serviced through its whole life cycle? Again, does he keep a piece of paper? Does he write down on a spreadsheet while he's watching Emmerdale or something that night? No, he just tags in, tags out, and that's recorded. And what he's done is recorded, similar to what to do when you're getting your car serviced. So why can't we do it with an asset worth 30,000? Some of you are working in pharmacy. You have machines in your pharmaceutical plants that are worth hundreds of thousands. Do they have the same amount of information available as that pint of milk, which costs €1? No. Why don't they? Simply because of this. And I come now to the crunch. Okay, so again, this is the northern window. This information has just showed you your soft packers, never horizontally, protect the products during and after installation. This is for the first fix. But what about happens if those windows are being repurposed or reused in the future life? Again, coming back to what I showed you earlier. So now let's look at the how. Every one of you, when you're going building a new extension or building a totally new building or buying a piece of equipment or buying a rail truck or buying a network for Gas Networks Ireland or buying a new pump, has a contract in place. So you're the buyer, you pays the piper, calls the tune. Why can't you simply do this? What we're advocating is why can't you just simply put in a clause in your contract, a condition of actually supplying, that not alone are you CE compliant, which is a statutory requirement in Europe, but how are you going to put the proper asset tagging on your product at manufacturing stage so that asset can be tracked for its whole life, not just its primary cycle, but possibly secondary cycle, as I tried to demonstrate with the reuse of those windows in the previous slide. It's down to contract. But not only is it down to contract, then how do you actually use these tags in an effective and efficient manner? You connect the dots. So nearly finished. Last slide. So it's all about this. So it's about planning, calculating, ordering, receiving goods, construction, maintenance, and it's about recycling. And how do you actually achieve this? You start here. You plan with the end in mind. You tell your designers, you tell your procurement people, you tell your PQSs that you don't just want a building that the windows open, the doors close, the hot water flows out of the hot taps and the cold water flows out of the cold taps. You don't want just a graphical model, i.e. a BIM model that's no use to anybody. You don't want a full list of information that's assumed into this. You don't want documents that nobody ever looks at, and you certainly don't want them in lever arch files. What you want is, we started off with asset life cycle. Again, going back to my fridge. I paid an extra 100 quid for that plus rating. Did it actually deliver that 10 quid of less electricity energy usage on an annual basis? Does your building actually deliver what was set out to do? Have you set up and told your planning guys exactly what you want? Do you want to be GLEED? Do you want to be BREEAM? Do you want any other standards available? But then when you've collected all that information, how do you actually funnel all that information down or distill it? Since we're Irish, we're very familiar with whiskey, so distillation is a good one. And how do we actually get that down to an IWMS? IWMS is a fancy word for CAFM system. We're all familiar with computer-aided facilities management systems. They now call it integrated work management systems. How do we actually ensure that that actually works? Conclusion, engage in all encompassing a robust GS1 indexed auto ID methodology that helps clients manage the entire life cycle of all core maintainable assets. And this is, for those of you in the construction business or engineering business or design business, you're familiar with the the Royal Institute of British Architects stages of work. There's 8 stages: definition, preparation, brief, design, technical design, construction, handover, and in use. In the case of National Children's Hospital, they've gone down to soft landings where the designers and the contractors are actually engaged formally for 3 years after the handover of the building. Not unlike most of your buildings, when you get practical completion and then the contractor has to fix everything in the 12 months of the fixed liability period. So now the contractor, the building, the designers have to stay engaged and they have to deliver to these performance targets. So just to summarize, all this legislation is driving change. It's up to asset management folks like yourselves to actually either take this as a cost or go the extra mile and actually turn it into an advantage, turn it into a sales pitch. And again, the last thing, or second last thing, is this one. How do you actually ensure that, again, using technology, that the parts that you're using on your very expensive machinery, which you have warranties carried because you're all an asset, so you understand warranties, how do you ensure that this type of solution, which is a very expensive piece, it's a wall race for a mechanical plant, how do you ensure that this is genuine? Again, same technology. And for those of you in the pharmaceutical business, you're very familiar with the changes that have been made in year space with the FMD, which is Falsified Medicine Directive, where when you go and buy a box of aspirin or anything over the counter these days, the barcode that's used by the pharmacist or the pharmacist assistant, actually has a unique identifier in it. And if that unique identifier is identified twice, or multiple times, there's immediate investigation because all those numbers go to a central database, and that number should only have gone through an EPOS and an electronic point of sale once. If it goes through twice, then somebody has repacked that packet, or somebody has cloned that packet and is actually using it. And FMD actually has reduced the amount of forgery and counterfeit drugs at a massive scale for the pharmaceutical companies worldwide because of FMD. And that was the world getting together and using barcode auto D information. So I hope you enjoy this. As you get from me, I'm passionate about this. I'm thankful to the IFS guys for giving me the opportunity to actually put a lot of the experience of my long working career into use in such a fabulous project as the National Children's Hospital, which, as I said at the start, will bring a lot of comfort to a lot of families who have the misfortune of having children who have to attend hospital for some part of their life. So with that, thank you very much.
Dan, many thanks for that presentation. Excellent, and obviously a very noble project to be involved in with the Children's Hospital as well. So fair play. Thank you very much. Folks, we're just going to move to Q&A. Just maybe before we get into the Q&A, just with the poll, Colin, I don't know if you can maybe bring that up on screen just from Slido, and if anybody hasn't answered, maybe if you can just go into the link there that had been sent on earlier. It's on the chat box there. So just looking at some of the results there that are coming through. So I suppose top of the list, one that resonates with myself as well, inaccurate and or incomplete, but it still had significant value. I suppose coming in second then, the accurate and complete and add significant value. So I suppose where we all aspire to be. Accurate and complete but adds limited value, and inaccurate and or incomplete and adds limited value. So I think the majority recognize the value of asset management and see it as adding value, whether they're kind of at a complete or incomplete stage. So I don't know, Dan, if you have any particular comments or views on what we're seeing here with the poll results.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the first one, inaccurate and are incomplete but still add significant value. Interesting result, but are you getting the maximum amount or optimum amount of value or maximum amount of value out of those assets? I suppose that's the question. And I think one of the problems that a lot of folks face in the operational side of business is they don't have an accurate baseline to work off of in the first place.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I know with my own experience and the company I'm working with, Gas Networks Ireland, you know, I have seen very significant value where we have almost complete, and there's obviously other areas where we don't have the complete asset data, but we're hopefully getting there. But yeah, I can see very significant value, but there's more to be gained. Absolutely, there's more there for the taking.
I think so. Just to take that a bit further, Ken, the main situation is value comes from how long the asset lasts. I mean, we're all familiar with buying a car. I mean, as the car gets older, it diminishes in value, but it still gets you from A to Z if you've looked after it.
Yeah.
So, and we're also familiar back in the day that you brought your car and you got it serviced every 6 months, and they took out the filters and changed the oil, and then subsequently discovered, well, you don't really have to change the oil every 6 months. You can take longer, and this again saves money. So I think it's about connecting the dots and understanding that if I don't do this, what's the impact? But to establish that, as I said earlier, you need a baseline. You need to be connected. You need to share. And I have a son and 2 grandchildren and partner in New Zealand, and my grandson Sean, they have the equivalent of our libraries, but they don't share books. They share toys, and we're all familiar with those of us who've gone through having kids, and I've now grandchildren, of how long interest a kid has in a toy. New Zealand, they solved that problem. They don't send them to the landfill. They send them to this library, and they're shared with other kids. And it's that sharing is actually built into the New Zealand psychic from day one, and it transcends across their attitude for the rest of their lives. And it starts at 2, when a kid starts to realize what a toy is. That's a change.
Yeah, it's an invaluable life lesson as well, isn't it? Like,
Yep.
to establish that kind of mindset at an early age is, yeah, it's a big accomplishment, but it's a good part of the world with good people there. So,
Yep.
Dan, we might move to just the Q&A there. So I just see a question in here. How do you see the circular design of assets supporting infrastructure, managing the impacts of climate change?
So the circular design is, as I said throughout the presentation, it's about the design, starting with the end in mind. So are you designing a building that's going to use products that at the end of the day, they will go to the landfill? Or are you looking, as I showed earlier in the slide pack, at the products that are used, and are you saying to yourself, okay, if I do it this way, can that particular product be reused at some time in the future? Am I storing enough information so I can go on Done Deal or something like that and actually go and have all the information available to actually go and sell that product? Some of us in this call have sold houses in their past and moved up to bigger houses, or in my case, I've downsized. But imagine if you had the original information and you didn't have to go off and get a survey done of your house. Imagine if you could keep that information in a central repository where you could actually access that information. And then somebody who's interested in a similar asset anywhere in the world could actually go in and say, this guy is selling 50 windows of this dimension. Great. How have they been serviced over the years? Yes, they have. Now I'm going to turn around to my designer and I'm going to tell the designer, now can you design that building? Because I don't need the same specification windows as you would use in, say, Johnson & Johnson or MSD or Intel. I just need windows. So now I'm going to get my designer to go and ensure that the OPEs in my new building actually accommodate those windows that I'm going to get successfully from this building that I go selling off. That's just a done deal type of solution. But it's again down to information. It's again down to sharing. So, I mean, circular design, that's what I believe to be circular design, is not just stopping at practical completion. Asset supporting infrastructure, absolutely. I mean, assets, you're in the business of getting gas from A to Z. I mean, you have a whole lot of supports. And giving you one example, in your particular case, chains are used for holding your pumps. Sorry, it's Irish Water. I think there's somebody in the call from Irish Water. Chains are used for supporting pumps inside in wells, in the sumps where they actually pump sewage or surface water. The fact that they use chains requires under law that those chains are checked on a regular basis. If they use the fabric, they wouldn't have to be checked. So therefore, simply by changing from a chain to a fabric that doesn't require, under law, regular checking, actually reduces your maintenance cycle by half. And that's what I call circular design. Does that make sense?
Certainly does, yeah. Thanks very much. Thank you. Folks, if anyone has any more questions there, you can pop them into the Slido. Just maybe when we're waiting there on any more questions. Dan, just one question myself. You mentioned about the Children's Hospital now, and this, I suppose, my question isn't specific to the Children's Hospital. It's more in a broader sense, the performance metrics. So I suppose you could say the expected outcome with the delivery of any asset or implementation of any asset. How contractually significant, and I suppose what I mean by that is the incentives that need to be put in place. I mean, you could do a wonderful piece of work and everything looks great, but it doesn't deliver, I suppose, on what was wanted or what was required. So how significant from a contractual point of view? I presume there would need to be very strong commercial incentives there for contractors and so on. Like, I suppose how contractually significant do you see that, and what role, I suppose, does asset information play in kind of in enabling, I suppose, the outcome?
So to answer your question there, I just put back up the slide there. So it starts back here with the DCHI, the asset management strategy that you have in place. So, and this is the BIM model, building information modeling, and digital construction handover information. So if to actually achieve what you've said, these KPIs for your core maintainable assets is what's important. Because a building, if you look at just one aspect of a building, the air handling system. Connor's on the call there, he's very familiar with this from an hour's perspective. But if the specification says that you have X amount of air handling per hour or per day or whatever, well then, are you achieving that? But then the other criteria comes in is that if you design it that people are not going to open windows, fine. But if you don't take into consideration the people element of it and people keep opening windows, well then all your metrics go out the door. So it's not just about design, it's about behavior, it's about understanding what your end customer needs. So it's pointless putting in a high-end air handling system with all the capabilities that God ever put into the world if the people who are going to use that building like to open windows. And this is typically what happens in a school. Teachers like to open windows in their classrooms. And they expect then the heating system and the ventilation system in that classroom to compensate for the fact that they have opened the windows. But the design guy back here on the left-hand side of the screen was told, well, those windows are going to be closed. So it's not just coming up with a number and deciding that's what I'm going to design to. You have to understand your end customer need. And then it's going back to your penalty. I worked in the petrochemical industry for years. We're a Japanese company before I joined Dell. And we built and designed pharmaceutical or petrochemical plants in Africa and in the Middle East. And we didn't get paid. This was Chiyoda, part of Mitsubishi. We didn't get paid unless the actual production targets were met. Now, the Japanese signed up for this. I thought it was absolute madness. But I can assure everybody on this call that the Japanese guys in charge, Uchikura was his name, he ensured that everybody, and I mean everybody, every contractor, every employee understood that they were working to a target. Because that was the target. And they got paid handsomely when the project actually delivered higher than the performance criteria was made. Now they weren't totally suicidal about this. They actually got paid a base amount, but their profit, the make and break of the project was dependent on them meeting those performance targets. So it's a hard question to answer, Ken. I mean, there's a whole lot of factors, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Dan. Look, one final question here, Dan. So, Dermot, interested in the adoption rate of this technology in various sectors and the use cases at large scale, are there relatively narrow applications?
Okay, so the simple answer to that question, you go down to your super value and you go around and you unplug all the cash registers. You can imagine the amount of bedlam that's there, right? So imagine the person asking you to go back and look at the price of what that box of cornflakes cost, and then you walk down to the back to the shelf. You haven't got a biro with you, and by the time you walk back up to the counter again, you've forgotten what the price was. So again, this technology is tried and tested in a huge amount of industries. It beggars belief that it is not used in probably one of the most pollutant intensive industries, which is construction, or built environment, to be fair to construction, and it's not used. And as I said, there is instances today, and people on this call are aware of this, where people just before commissioning are running around sticking barcodes onto equipment. And this 39% is our contribution of this 208 million tons. You as asset managers, by simply changing the contract and putting in more robust contract clauses, can actually change this. So to answer your question, is this work? Absolutely. If that person is interested, I can share numerous use cases where this has been successful. And it will be successfully used in the construction eventually. And it is. I mean, to be fair to the construction guys in the country today, and we should, as Irish people, we should be all proud of this. There are building contractors who started off in Intel many years ago, and we all know Intel spent billions, who are today building data centers in the Antarctic, in Norway, in Sweden, in Amsterdam, in Italy, in the US, and all over Europe, simply because we're good at what we do as an industry. But I also said technology is changing at a rapid pace, so therefore we have to stay ahead of the curve. And clients actually drive this. And the only reason that we're so good at building data centers across the world is because the Intel guys, the MSDs, the Johnson & Johnsons, the Eli Lillys, and all these other clients actually insisted that these contractors who learnt their lessons on those projects actually moved up a notch. And it is client-based. So nobody's going to do anything for nothing. But it's the client who has to manage those buildings for 30 or 40 years after they've been built. Okay?
Okay. Thanks very much, Dan. Thanks very much, Noel, for a really good presentation as well. Thank you.
No problem, my pleasure. So if anybody wants to contact me, I mean, they'll get me at Dan at IFAC Solution here. I'll just call it up here. I mean, I'm happy to share to that person who wanted more information. Sorry, just going through the next slide. You know, there's so many slides. This is my contact information here. Let's just come up. Last one. There you go. Dan at IFACsolutions.com. Okay, right. Happy to talk to anybody. As I said, I'm on the twilight of my career, so it's interesting. Things will change. Okay, thanks.
Thanks again, Dan. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're pretty much at the end of the session there now, so I just want to wrap it up. First and foremost, I just want to say thanks there to Dan for that excellent presentation. I suppose it's really taught me a lot and opened my eyes, I suppose, to the value of optimizing asset information and asset tagging in relation to the overall application that it can have in asset management. And I think that's a great presentation, Dan. Thanks for that. And I know for me, who deals with different assets altogether, it's always very interesting to see how there's different innovative thinking and developments in the area of asset management in so many different industries right across the globe. And I suppose the value of what you've just spoken to us there and the information you've passed on to us there, to me, that epitomizes the value of these sessions that we're having through the Munster branch here, and we're, you know, enabling learning from each other as asset management professionals and sharing information on how asset management is applicable in various different industries. So I think it's been a really valuable session. I know I personally took an awful lot from it anyway, so thanks for that. I suppose more general kind of housekeeping stuff. Thanks to everybody else as well who took the time to dial in today. I hope you enjoyed the session and that you gained equally from it as much as I feel I did. I'd also like to thank our committee who've put an awful lot of hard work into pulling this event together. As always, there's a lot of commitment required to making sure these events run smoothly, that we have speakers who are going to engage the community here and who are going to, you know, give us presentations that are really interesting. So there's a lot of time and hard work goes in by everybody involved. So just want to take this opportunity to thank the committee again for all their wonderful work that they do in the background making these sessions happen. To all the other members of the IAM and for anybody on the session there, it's just a note that maybe you could go into your IAM account on the IAM website and just update your email preferences and make sure they're up to date on your profile page to make sure that you're getting the right communication from the IAM as well, and that you're up to date with all the information that's happening in the community. And I suppose on that note then, the next event, I suppose we'd be hoping at the Munster branch to push on with these type of events in the virtual world. We'd be hoping to have another one in June, and hopefully people will, you know, be interested in those and would be interested in joining them. So if there's any suggestions about potential topics that you'd like us to cover, please feel free to email anyone on the committee about that, and hopefully we'll have another successful event to look forward to in June. So thank you all for your attendance today. Really appreciate it.